Welcome to another video by your friend Matthew Shirling. It's been quite some time since I made a tarot video. I think at least a month. I made a video about a month ago on the Tower card in the Major Arcana. So I've made this series here called the Tarot series where I talk about the Major Arcana cards, and I have made episodes on all of the Major Arcana up to this point. As I said, I made one about the Tower last time, and I'm going in order here. So the Tower card is card 16. It comes after the Devil card, and just to remind you, the Devil card has several associations, just like all of these cards. For me, what makes the most sense when thinking about the Devil card is that the figures on that card are chained to the box that the devil is standing on. So there are associations with kind of like self-imprisonment, especially because the figures on that card, the chains around their necks are loose, and they could take those chains off. So there's the implication that they could easily remove the chains, but they're keeping the chains there, so it's kind of like self-imposed or self-perpetuated. And what those chains represent could mean many things depending on an individual's hang-ups or blockages or attachments or that sort of thing. So oftentimes the type of limitations or the type of restrictions that the Devil card represents are kind of like limiting belief systems, destructive habits, too much emphasis on maybe rationality, and kind of like an unwillingness to see magic or mystery or meaning or expansion or freedom that also exists in reality. All of those things also exist in reality, but if we're kind of like too if we are in a state that is represented by the Devil card, perhaps that could mean that we're falling victim to those sorts of limitations and kind of clinging to those obstacles, and maybe clinging to like a lack mind state rather than an abundance mind state, that sort of thing, right? And the Tower card that comes right after the Devil card, those two figures have been launched from the Tower, and the Tower kind of represents that previous confinement. So they have released themselves from the confinements that I was just talking about. But it's not necessarily a comfortable or positive process of releasing oneself from those sorts of self-imposed limitations. It can be actually very jarring and uncomfortable and disorienting, which the Tower card represents. There's a lightning bolt in the Tower card, so there's some sort of either epiphany or like intense cause or impact that has allowed these figures to be released from their prison, so to speak. But they have to kind of like start from scratch in a certain way now. Not necessarily from scratch, because at this point in the Fool's journey, they've been through a lot of transformations, so they carry those transformations with them. The Fool carries those transformations with him or her or them. But nevertheless, the Tower card represents that paradigm shift, but that paradigm shift is unsettling, but necessary, right? So after they have been released from the tower, we find ourselves at card 17 in the Major Arcana, and card 17 is the star card. And, the number 17 is my favorite number. So because of that, I have a special affinity for this card. It's not my favorite, it's not like my all-time favorite card, surprisingly. Sometimes I'm surprised by that because I would imagine that I would automatically consider it my favorite card just because it is card 17, but things don't quite work that way, and thank goodness that I don't just passively and automatically say, the star is my favorite card because it's number 17. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful card, very beautiful card, completely different type of energy from the two cards that come before it. And there's a sense of serenity, there's a sense of vulnerability, freedom. She is nude, and there's kind of a callback to the Temperance card. The Temperance card had the figure kind of pouring water from one vessel to another, but kind of in an alchemical way, where the water kept on being exchanged from the two vessels, whereas here, this figure is pouring one into the little pond or whatever, back into the source from which it came, and pouring the other jug onto the land. So there's a sense of balance here, and there's a sense of shift from the Temperance card, where the two vessels are being poured in different places rather than from one to the other. And I mean, there's a lot to unpack there that could have multiple significances, obviously. But, in general, I would say that this card represents a certain reprieve or rest after the jarring nature of the tower card, after the figures get launched from the tower and have undergone a paradigm shift and a release from certain self-imposed imprisonments. Here is kind of like a healing card and a peaceful card that comes after that, which is very comforting, to imagine that trajectory. It's like after we release ourselves, or at least become conscious and intentional about like untangling our own karmic patterns or whatever, part of that process includes peace and serenity and stillness and nourishment and healing. And when I was kind of like mapping out my takes on each of the cards in the Major Arcana in my book that I'm about to release. My book is called From Infinity to Personhood, and in one of the chapters I go through each of the cards in the Major Arcana, and the way I made sense of this card is that it kind of like represents the part of the fool's journey when the fool realizes that they have a surplus or fountain or wellspring of love inside of them. Because that's one thing that can happen when we kind of clear out the space within us, right? When we clear out like the automatic patterns or the things that we just clutch at or cling at or are completely entangled in a habitual way. Sometimes if we make space within us, one thing that becomes apparent or even palpable is like the presence of love within us. You could say that, yeah, when we kind of like put the egocentrism and the self-absorption and the fear, really, right? Because the devil card, I think that's one probably really helpful key word to use, is that it's fears, really, right? It's fears that prevent us from taking off those loose chains around our necks, so to speak, right? So when we have kind of like cleared out some of that fear and created more spaciousness within us, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. I don't want it to be too abstract. I'm using general terms, but I'm saying things not in like, I'm only kind of expressing things that actually have helped me out when I think about these states or stages or obstacles or dilemmas or in my own life, And so I think that when we cultivate that spaciousness, when we kind of work through those fears, any fears that we might have, then we can start to develop more self-love and love for others, and more presence with ourselves, more presence toward others, more active listening, and more access or activation, access to the wellspring of love within us. Where we realize that we want to express and receive love. And, Rupert Spira, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's a very helpful teacher when it comes to like non-duality and stuff, right? But when he talks about love, he says that love is when we realize our shared nature with others, basically. We realize that we share the same being, so to speak. So, love can be like, not romantic love, but like, love for thy neighbor and stuff like that. That can, in some ways it's very simple, but in another way it's sometimes hard to like define or something, right? But so that's why I kind of like his way of framing it, which is like, when we experience love or encounter love or acknowledge love, it's when we're realizing that we share the same nature or share the same being with others, whether other human beings or other plants or animals or whatever. And I think that's really, that rings true for me. That's one resonant way to think about love. And so at this point, in the Fool's Journey, it's like after we jump from the tower, after we start to disentangle ourselves from automatic patterns and stuff, and from fear, and kind of like just crowded and cluttered activity within us, we can suddenly, it's kind of like when you pay attention to something, you're more likely to kind of feel love toward that thing. So when you can actually pay attention, there's often love there. And to me, that's kind of the way I see this card, or at least part of it. obviously, you have the 7 stars here, which some people say are the 7 chakras. Then you have the big yellow star. Some people say that star represents like the North Star. So that's another helpful model here where, at this point, the Fool has found some sort of North Star, some sort of guiding principle or guiding intention, or, like something that is luring them, or, they've found some sort of calling, so to speak. And so that's cool. I love that. And that's more kind of individualized for each person, which is part of the whole game, right? There's kind of like the personalized application of all these things, depending on a person's personality and past and traumas and gifts and strengths and weaknesses and stuff. And then there's like kind of the more generalized or universal application of these things. And so, on the personalized aspect, it's up to the individual to figure out what that means for their own localized, personalized lives, right? And then on kind of the more general or universal level, we could say that North Star, that guiding principle, is love here, and the healing that comes from love, and the presence of love underneath all the things that we throw on top of it, within ourselves. So, yeah, there's a lot of peace and freedom in this card for sure. There's a lot of balance, with one cup being poured into the water and one cup being poured onto the land. So it's like we're feeding the source from which our love comes from, and kind of like honoring it and appreciating it. And we're also pouring water onto the land, so we're pouring it onto our environments. We're pouring it onto like our day-to-day lives. So those are some of my thoughts and associations with the Star card. Card 17. Until next time, peace.